Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to day 2 of the 2021 International Conference on Official Statistics. On behalf of Statistics Korea and the United Nations Statistics Division, I'd like to thank all of the speakers and participants for joining us at this event. I'm Hyunshim Amy Choi, Master of Ceremony of this conference. Our conference this year is organized under the theme of the role of data and statistics in understanding and mitigating risk, what we have learned from crisis situations, including the global pandemic. Building on yesterday's discussion, we are exchanging concrete experiences and responding to challenges. Today, we're adopting an interesting format in which same topics are addressed twice by distinctive groups of panelists. So that the upcoming sessions 4 and 5, Part B, will bring in new groups of panelists, while their topics stay the same as the Part A from earlier. In doing so, we intend to cover broad geographic and contextual landscape. If you registered at the conference and are joining us through a live streaming in our official conference website, you can choose either Korean or English channel using the live streaming menu option. Also, anyone joining us through our official conference website can participate in Q&A and discussion by leaving their questions and comments in the comment section located in the website under the live streaming tab. The website also provides detailed information of this conference, including its program, biography of speakers, and presentation materials for downloading. That's all for the housekeeping announcements. We'll be moving down on the program to replay the keynote speech for day 2, delivered by Ms. Sheida Badii, Managing Director of Open Data Watch. Ms. Badii has been an active member of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Group on Data Revolution, co-chairs the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, known as DSN, and has played a key role in many initiatives. Previously, she worked at the World Bank and served as the long-term director of the Development Data Group. With that, please turn your attention to this video.
Thank you very much, and greeting to all. I'm delighted to be providing the keynote presentation for day 2 of the International Conference on Official Statistics. The topic selected is really most timely and critical. In fact, looking back, I have the fondest memories from this conference in 2017, both because it was in person in Seoul, where we got to meet many partners, but also the topic, one close to my heart, on open data. That conference at that time provided a very frank and substantive discussions on open data, which we have systematically followed up since then. For today, in my presentation, my focus will be on building better statistical systems, learning from crisis, based on the work of my group, Open Data Watch, working with many close partners. I would like to share with you 6 lessons that we have learned that point to key vulnerability areas that countries face that affect them negatively during crisis and have to be mitigated or ways to mitigate and maybe even ease the negative effects. So let me go through those 6 lessons one by one. Lesson 1 is that crisis and emergencies due to conflict, natural disaster, and pandemics such as COVID-19 are on the rise, as we're all observing. Amid these hardships, people are born, get married, divorce, and die. So we need robust statistical and administrative systems to capture critical information. One of those critical systems is civil registration and vital statistics systems. Without robust CRVS systems, governments struggle to understand the scale of a crisis accurately and plan services and safeguard basic human rights. The reason for why we need better CRVS systems are clear, but we still see many poor functioning systems across the world. many births still go unregistered. And even death, of course, as you've heard earlier, 40% worldwide are unregistered. And many other critical life events such as marriage and divorce. On the other hand, there are many successful examples and best practices of how a country overcomes all odds and gets back on track, harnessing CRVS systems in conflict, emergencies, and fragile settings. Recently, working with partners, we have published a compendium on CRVS in time of crisis, which documents such cases and shares those experiences to safeguard people's rights to access services during conflict, protect the rights of refugees and migrants, and be used to respond to natural disasters or health crises like COVID-19. So let's move to lesson 2. Lesson 2 is that based on 2 different studies that we have done, we see that we have a significant issue with many data systems in countries if they continue to not be able to produce more sex-disaggregated data and make it available for time of crisis. When we looked at key indicators needed to measure status and well-being of women in 25 countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia Pacific, we see that together only 50% of the needed data are available sex disaggregated, and that is both in national and international databases. Also, we looked at data on health, economic opportunities, and education of women in 75 low and lower middle income countries. Using available data, we could identify countries where women and children were particularly vulnerable to the health and economic impacts of the pandemic. But in many countries, measured weaknesses were compounded by a lack of data needed to assess current conditions or to plan for recovery from COVID-19 crisis. Unless we make major investments in these data systems, these vulnerabilities will persist long after the pandemic has run its course. Let's look at lesson 3. Here we see some good news. We see improvements in open data across the world and in all countries from high income to low income, as the figure on the left shows. Based on Open Data Watch's measure called ODIN, Open Data Inventory, which measures data availability and openness for 178 countries, and it's been doing this since 2015. Despite these open data improvements that we see, we still need improvements in the overall data dissemination practices. As we have seen, that demand for data during crisis rises, and it provides us a great opportunity to create value and use this increased demand for data. Our research shows that we all need to do better to consolidate many websites and make it easier for users to find data. In one of our studies, for example, we found that a country had 20 related websites, which of course you can imagine is very confusing for users. We also need to do better in allowing data interoperability, access to metadata, and overall put users at the center of our data dissemination strategy and measure use and collect feedback. In fact, we will be publishing more research material on this shortly based on a study by ODW and Paris 21. But I think this is a very important lesson on during time of crisis to be able to improve data access and availability. Let's move to lesson 4. Lesson 4, being able to assess capacity and where a country is strong and where it needs more improvement is critical. The ultimate goal is, of course, to have all parts of the statistical systems working together, like foundational systems with administrative systems, with surveys and census, and other components of the national statistical system. But many are weak in one or another, but some at the center of the Venn diagram, as you see, are weak in multiple areas. And some of these weaknesses have been persisting over many, many years. And one of the reasons is that we need to build sustainable systems from production all the way to dissemination and use. It's not good enough if data produced is of high quality and timely, but stays closed and is not disseminated, or even if is available, it's not really used. So this is a particularly important lesson for data to be valuable in time of crisis, such as COVID-19. So we are advocating for building capacity along the data value chain. Lesson 5, we need to all do better in planning and identifying collaborations and resources needed for better and more resilient statistical systems. We are not there yet on this. A recent study shows that of the 74 IDA eligible countries in low-income countries, only 46 have updated NSDSs, and of those, not all critical areas are covered. For example, only half of those 46 mention needs for better gender data and improving capacity for sex-disaggregated data. So we need better planning to identify weaknesses and risks and build a realistic budget and resource mobilization plan. We have many best practices in this area to share. My final lesson, lesson 6, is we need to think beyond traditional data productions and look for tools and partners that could help with other existing data and with making smart analysis in time of crisis possible. Here is an example that I'm using of a tool called PopGrid, which many of you have heard of, which is a data collaborative providing geospatial population data consolidated from a variety of sources that could allow authorities to develop responses measures. It's had many successful applications and was very recently used and very popular tool during the Haiti earthquake. And some of the maps that you see are related to the Haiti earthquake. So based on these 6 lessons, let me end by offering a way forward for an enabling environment to utilize lessons learned during crisis and try to mainstream and build better statistical systems. At the national level, we need to capitalize on higher demand for data. And this is really important for us to build on this higher demand for data and use that energy for building better systems. We also need to build on many of the innovative approaches that you've heard during the conference, and you're going to hear more of this. But while it's important to build on these innovative approaches, it is also very critical that in the process, not to forget the importance of building up foundational systems, particularly those critical for times of crisis, like health management information systems and civil registration systems that I showed in my lesson 1. At the international level, I'm particularly excited to see many important initiatives that are coming out, learning from the lessons from our times of crisis. I have covered 3 of them here. One is more and better access to data, both sectoral data, cross-country sectoral data, but, such as the work that the WHO is doing for making health information more accessible and of higher quality, but also examples such as cross-country and agency-wide data, such as the plans that are in the works right now for building a new UN data portal. So this is really exciting at the international level. The second thing I'm very excited about is that in most of these international initiatives, we see that there's importance being attached, and all the work around data is being complemented with more work on data governance and sharing experience and agreeing on common approaches. And this is what we're going to be hearing a lot more in the next few months about the progress on data stewardship and data governance. And finally, very exciting that the Coalition of Development Data Donors is forming, called the BERN Network, which is one of its key products will be an information hub on smarter financing called the Clearinghouse, and we would be launched at the upcoming World Data Forum. And this will definitely help us with mobilizing more and better financing for development data and all the improvements that we've been discussing in building better statistical systems for time of crisis. So together with the lessons we have learned and many that will be covered during the course of the conference, we will have a rich set of best practices to help us build better data systems. Thank you for the opportunity to share these lessons with you. And I look forward to participating in the sessions that follow, and really look forward to see you in person or in virtually at the World Data Forum in Bern in 32 days. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Ms. Padi for sharing her insights with us, and thank everyone for your attention. Now, I'd like to welcome back everyone and invite you all to Session 4, Part B. The chair of this session is Mr. Stephen McFeely, Director of Data and Analytics at the WHO, who is serving in a number of international statistical bodies, including the International Statistical Literacy Program, the Committee of the Chief Statisticians of the UN System, known as CCSUN, and the Advisory Board of the Statistical Journal of the International Association for Official Statistics, known as IAOS. Before joining the WHO, he was the head of statistics and information at the UN Conference on Trade and Development. Prior to joining the UN, he was the Deputy Director General at the Central Statistics Office in Ireland. With this, I'd like to invite Mr. McFeely to take the stage for Session 4, Part B.
Good afternoon, good morning to everybody. Greetings from Geneva. I hope everybody's well, and thank you for joining this session. So this is a very important session. Over the last number of years, we've seen national statistical offices and national statistical systems around the world switch to new modes and new models of surveying. We've seen statistical offices having to move their staff to work from home and measure a number of aspects of the pandemic itself, from disease prevalence to impacts of well-being. To do this, they've had to adapt long-standing statistical concepts such as unemployment and reconfigure them for the new realities of people working from home and receiving benefits from the state. They've quickly had to establish new partnerships to work with new partners in order to harness new types of administrative or secondary data. So in summary, it's clear over the last 18 months, national statistical offices and national statistical systems have had to adapt. They've proven to be very resilient and very adaptive. So today, the idea of this session is to explore some of these adaptations, to understand some of the best cases of what national statistical offices did, and what lessons can we draw from those changes. In other words, perhaps in the pandemic gave us permission to do things that possibly we wouldn't have had the courage to do otherwise. So we'd like to explore these issues. To help us do that, we have an expert panel from around the world. We have colleagues joining us from the World Bank in Rome, from the CBS in the Netherlands, from Statistics Korea here in Korea, and also from Jordan and South Africa. So each speaker will have 12 minutes to present some interesting case studies from their country, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. So to begin with, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Alberto Zeza from the World Bank, who's based in Rome, and he will talk us through some of the adaptations that they've made, examining the national adaptations in their World Bank UNSD survey on national statistical systems response to COVID-19. Alberto, the floor is yours.
Thank you to the organizer also for having me. So good afternoon, good morning, everyone. As Steven said, my name is Alberto Zezza. I'm a program manager with the Development Data Group at the World Bank, based in Rome at the Center for Development Data. Today I will be presenting on some results on a global survey of national statistical offices that we did in partnership at the World Bank in partnership with the UN Statistical Division. Francesca Perucci in the session earlier today presented some other results, so there will be some overlap with this presentation, but we thought since probably the attendance is different, it would be also useful to give this global picture, but also encourage you to look at her presentation because in fact, there are several differences and we decided to cover different parts of the result. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all the representatives of National Statistical Offices that participated in the survey, and encourage the ones who have not participated in previous rounds to participate in the future. So the objective of the survey was to provide information to the global statistical community on the impact of COVID on statistical operations in countries. And it was convened by UNSD, by the Development Data Group of the World Bank, but also in coordination with the UN regional commissions. We have fielded so far 4 rounds of the survey. The first one was in May 2020 and the last one in June 2021. And we had about 120 respondents per round, which is between 60-70% of the participation. I provide in the slide the links on both the World Bank and UNSD websites where you can find all the reports from the survey. So today I want to focus particularly on what we can learn from the survey going forward in terms of what can we expect, how will this, let's say, the post-COVID world look like, and also a little bit of the dynamics, not only of how countries have been impacted, but which are the ones who have been able to recover more quickly, what constraints are more severe, and so what is also a little bit the heterogeneity of impacts by region, by income level. And so what also this maybe start a reflection on what this survey can provide going forward, because we also plan to continue this survey probably in different forms in the future. So quickly on some of the key descriptives from the survey. As I said, we fielded the first round in May 2020, and there, of course, I mean, the first reaction by many statistical offices was to close their offices either fully or partially, as you see in the orange and yellow bar in this chart, and then there was some reopening over the summer in the Northern Hemisphere of 2020. But then in the most recent round with additional waves of COVID in some countries, we also witnessed a little bit of a reversal in this trend, which some more countries restricting more the access again to the offices. Remote work, as we all know, has been a solution. So a lot of countries quickly moved into different forms of remote work, and as we see in this graph, I mean, this has been a persistent trend, and still, let's say, only a third of the countries in the last round do not still ask staff to work from home. These also had, COVID also, of course, had huge impacts on face-to-face data collection, with almost all countries being impacted. And recently, in say just before the summer, in the last round, we see more countries returning to face-to-face, but still almost a third still with fully halted data collection for face-to-face surveys. But on the other hand, NSOs were also super quick to adapt in terms of mobilizing new data sources, particularly phone surveys, administrative data, web surveys, social media. And in the reports, there is more on how heterogeneous these different means were between different groups of countries. And I also encourage you to look at Francesca Perucci's presentation this morning. She presents more results on these points. And one important point that was also made in the introduction is that then many countries took this opportunity to accelerate the modernization of their ICT in particular, but of their statistical system in general. And as you see in this graph, I mean, the green bar is the countries that say that they have significantly improved their ICT readiness in the 6 months before the survey round. And these percentages are fairly even across income groups. So even in low and middle income countries, there were significant progress and investment in this respect. Still, in the report, you will find that, of course, I mean, COVID has had, even with all these responses, has had huge impacts on some key reporting and also some key statistical operation like surveys and population censuses. But now I wanted also to start maybe a reflection on what does this mean for the future a little bit, and what were the dynamics. So let me spend just a minute explaining this graph, which might be a bit complicated, but it's important because also you will see the same in the next few slides. You have to the left the countries that say that their impact, their ability to produce essential statistics in May 2020 had been not affected in green, moderately affected in yellow, and severely affected in red. And on the right, the same for the May 2021, so the last round. Between the first round and the fourth round, how countries transition from one situation to the other. And we see that there is a significant share that have actually not transitioned from being impacted to say they're no longer impacted, that they're able to produce essential statistics. This is about 23%. But on the other hand, we still see that a lot of countries still report difficulties with the production of essential statistics. So we want to dig deeper into maybe what are the differences between these different groups. So in this graph, basically we zoom in on that 23% that managed to transition out a little bit, or to recover rather. And we see how they are disproportionately in high income countries. And so the pie chart on the top right corner, the ones in high income countries are the ones who manage to get out more than others. And you see the same in this graph as a percentage within each country group. You see that disproportionately, I mean, in lower middle income countries, only 32% of countries say in May 2021 they are no longer affected. And in this graph, we look at another group. We look at the group that still are affected. So that includes also countries that maybe they reported not being affected in 2020, but now they are. And here, on the other end, we see that there is a concentration in low and middle income countries and in some regions. That's the bottom right part of the chart, where you see in Africa, particularly, we have a high number of countries that are still feeling the impacts of COVID for the production of essential statistics. And finally, the ones who, the group that said that they had not been, their ability to report essential statistics had not been affected in May 2020, and they're still saying the same holds in 2021. And these again are more countries concentrated in Europe, in North America, in East Asia, and in high middle income countries. So there is, of course, from this chart, a clear indication of which are the countries that are still suffering more. And we want to see how these are different in terms of the issues that they have faced. And this chart looks at how budgets of how countries report their budgets have been impacted during the pandemic. And we see that low and lower middle income, again, I mean, they have seen more reductions in budgets, the red bars, from both government and donors. So here we point a big, in a way, responsibility for both national government and donors of let's say, not letting the statistical system down at such a critical moment, because countries have been squeezed between increased data demands and actually more budget constraints. So
2 minutes, Alberto.
Yes, I'm wrapping up. And also, similarly, the countries that have been impacted more, that report more frequently an increasing costs of both data collection and administration are disproportionately those in low and lower middle income countries. Finally, here in this slide, we divide the countries that have reported still being affected by the pandemic in May 2021, and those that have not, and we see that more of those that say that they have recovered there is more of in that group of countries that have modernized the ICT more, or that have resorted more to the use of new data sources. So these responses have then also led to a better outcome out of the crisis. So let me skip this one just to go to the conclusion. So as was being said also in the introduction, I mean, this was a revolution in the making in many ways of modernization of ICT, modernization of new data sources that has been accelerated by the pandemic. It was a trend that was in the background, but the pandemic definitely has accelerated. But still, data production has been affected, and for those countries that were squeezed by increased data demand and declining budgets, this was really a perfect storm. So in a way, there is a responsibility for us all to step up to support partnership, to mitigate and reverse the negatives, but also to consolidate and expand the innovation that has happened. And so finally, as far as the survey is concerned, we also think this can be a useful instrument going forward to understand and follow further how the situation will evolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. Our next speaker comes from the Netherlands. So I would like to introduce you to Mr. Edward Hurlings, who's a senior statistical researcher at CBS. A national accounts expert with also expertise in monitoring well-being. So Edwin is going to talk to us about the experiences in the Netherlands and the adaptations they made to help manage the crisis and risk and reduce risk. So Edwin, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. We have had a very long and dynamic year, but overall, it turns out that we've survived in a number of respects. We've survived fairly unscathed. The moment the first lockdown started, all staff immediately began working from home. I remember a webinar that our Director General gave about 1 or 2 weeks after the first lockdown, it had an audience of 2,300 people, all working from home. And it seemed as if all statistical work continued as always. I must say, I have, since March last year, and I've never seen live, which is weird. Also, all teams all over our organization immediately began making an inventory of known or expected risks. A lot of our statistical products are not independent of other statistics. A lot of it is interdependent. We produce, for example, national accounts, environmental accounts that depend on work done in other sectors of Statistics Netherlands, and they in turn depend on work done in other organizations. For example, our Royal Meteorological Society has a sensor network that produces data that we then use to produce statistics on emissions in the Netherlands, and that is then used in environmental accounts to produce new statistics at a macro level. And the aim then was to identify key dependencies and find out in what way they would be impacted by the COVID pandemic. Of course, the most serious risks, as in other countries, was that on survey response. We use a mix of online, telephone, and face-to-face interviews, like in other countries, of course. And it was very clear from the start that face-to-face interviews would be ended. All our surveyors were told to work from home, which in effect meant that they couldn't work at all, were given other tasks. It's a small percentage of total response in the Netherlands, but it's a very specific group. These are the people who are reticent to being surveyed. They have to be asked face-to-face whether they want to participate. If not, then we need to find someone with the same characteristics. Nowadays, I think 90 to 95% of all surveys is online. The costs are about 1/100th of a face-to-face interview. If someone doesn't respond online, then they are phoned, which costs about 1/10 of a face-to-face interview. And if need be, then they're approached face-to-face. But it was very clear that both the total response and the composition of survey population was going to be affected. Now, looking back, I think there were 3 key advantages why Statistics Netherlands was in a relatively strong position to deal with the impacts of COVID-19. The first is that we have a dedicated methodological division that is independent of other divisions with a more thematic specialization. So in each division in Statistics Netherlands, in each team, we have methodological experts who know everything about statistics specific to the subject that they're studying. So we have econometricians and other statisticians within the national accounts who produce the national accounts and know everything about balancing our input-output tables and what have you. But we have a separate methodological division who deal with the more complicated tasks. There we have people who are also professors in universities, know everything about statistics in general. And immediately a whole team was set to develop new methods to account for changes in survey populations, changes in response, to safeguard the quality of the response, think about new ways of weighting survey outcomes, and also think what would have to be done in the worst case scenario where entire surveys would fail. What also helps is that some surveys are done biannually, and last year was a year without a survey in those particular respects. The second strong advantage is that we rely very heavily on administrative data. We have about 200 databases of government agencies covering all households and firms, including, for example, what we call the social statistical database, which combines data from about 30 different registers to create what you might call a virtual census. One of the reasons why we have this is that we no longer have an actual census. We had one in 1971, but it failed. Back then, there were strong memories of what happened during the war when Dutch administration was so good that it actually helped the Germans find all Jewish households in the Netherlands. It's very hard to make yourself invisible administratively. At the same time, computers were coming up and people were afraid what might happen if their data would end up in government databases. There were a lot of privacy concerns. And this was actually when the first privacy laws emerged in the Netherlands. So the advantage now is that we have a lot of data available about people already, with which we can cover the information that falls away once something like a COVID lockdown happens. And the third is that our digital infrastructure is very strong. 98% of people in the Netherlands have broadband internet and also use it on a daily basis. Most of the people who work at CBS have a good network at home with Wi-Fi. They were able to switch immediately to working from home. And also, as soon as it became apparent that we would be working from home for a longer time, people were supported by giving them good office equipment for home, larger screens, good chairs, trivial things maybe, but if you work from home for a long time, you can also get ill. One of the good things is that we immediately started identifying key indicators that would be necessary for our main audience, the general audience, but also policymakers and politicians. We invested in getting information on excess mortality, on unemployment, on economic growth, on other areas that were expected to be impacted heavily during the lockdown, and putting that up on a dashboard on our main website so that people could track weekly or monthly what was happening to our economy and our society. There were excess mortality updates weekly that also got into the news that were key in the whole debate about the impact of COVID-19 and also its seriousness. Now, looking back over the last year, we are now starting to see the first results of the impact COVID-19 has had on our organization. Naturally, our social and health impacts, of course, the way that we work together, you start to see that people start to get wary of working at home, working without contact with other colleagues. So we're starting to return gradually to our office in teams. You're allowed now to go with a team on one day in the week and then also return again one quiet day. So we're starting to see each other again. But more importantly, we're starting to see the first results of last year's surveys. And our methodologists are starting to develop methods to identify whether what we're seeing over the last year is the result of COVID-19. Is it an outlier, for example? Or is it part of a longer term trend? How should we interpret what we've seen last year? Is this something temporary? Are there structural shifts? Is it an impact of an effect of changes in the composition of the population? And all of this work needs to be done quickly. We can't wait a few years and then find out that things were differently than we now think. And we're starting to think about ways to make the outcomes of 2020 consistent with those of previous years. We need to find out whether the results that we had last year can be compared with other years. This is where we stand at the moment. It's a bit too early to say how our organization has been affected structurally. This needs to be seen. But my feeling is that Statistics Netherlands is in a fairly strong position. We're part of one of the high-income countries with a long history with lots of investments over the last few years. So I hope that other countries can benefit from our experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. Bang on time. So congratulations. Very interesting. So with that, we move to our next speaker, Ms. Jison Jung, who's the Director of Big Data and Statistics at Statistics Korea. I'm looking forward to this talk because Ms. Jung has also a lot of private sector experience, having worked in Citibank and IBM. So you can see why she's the Director of Big Data. She's going to talk about how they managed to also manage the risk and look at risk reduction measures in Statistics Korea. Ms. Yun, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Jisoo Yoon, Director of Big Data Statistics Division at Statistics Korea. In this presentation, I'd like to highlight the following. impact of COVID-19 on COSTED and our strategy to prepare for post-COVID era. And then I will introduce the work of Big Data Statistics Division in line with COSTED strategy. Between the time the COVID-19 occurred last year and now, COSTED has had plans for 3 quinquennial census operations on top of number of basic surveys to operate. Looking back on early stage of COVID-19, the census on establishment scheduled in February last year, which happened to be right after Korea had its first coronavirus cases. So it was postponed twice, to March and then to June. On the contrary, smaller scale monthly surveys like the economically active population surveys proceeded as scheduled. In due time, COSTED formulated response strategies, and with this, we were able to operate 3 censuses without any disruption. A driver behind our successful census operation can be attributed to the fact that COSTED has gradually developed its response strategy through trial and error. At the beginning of outbreak, we avoided risks by delaying survey schedules. However, as the pandemic situation persisted and it became a long-term phenomenon, COSTED has expanded the transition to untagged surveys by making the survey more flexible. COSTED also has refined its COVID-19 response system, and we accelerated to facilitate the scientific production of statistics. Now COSTED is innovating national statistical production systems in preparation for post-COVID era. Our effort to build on innovation in the national statistical production system can be summarized as building smart system. S in safe and secure represents the expansion of untagged surveys on account of the safety for the people. We established a centralized organization unit for untagged survey and built a digital survey platform. M in modernized methodologies include the increased use of ICT-based survey and development of advanced sampling methodologies. A in alternative indicates the increased use of alternative data source, such as administrative data and private data, in order to enhance their efficiency and usability. This pillar is closely related to the work of Big Data Statistics Division I belong to, so I will address further details in the following slides. R in resilient represents the flexibility and agility in statistical production that is capable of addressing changes in statistical environment. And the last one, T, presents to enhance transparency by reinforcing communications with relevant entities like the public. Big Data Statistics Division is still pretty new organization, which is established in 2015. As of 2021, we have established 5 strategies with a vision of growth, and we defined 8 action plans to be carried out over the next 3 years. In the following slides, I would like to introduce the current Quick Win project under the new Big Data Statistics Development Strategy. As you might expect, our Quick Win project is related to the COVID-19. I quoted some articles on measuring the impact of COVID-19 crisis. Unfortunately, these were in Korean, so I translated some key contents into English, and the summary is that there are no timely and reliable statistics that can be applied to the policy immediately in the midst of disaster. And National Statistical Office should play that role in the near future. Looking at the data available to the policy at the COVID-19 situation, 87% of official statistics are produced at more than a year's cycle, nearly half of which are based on survey, and thus fall short of expectations in terms of timeliness and detail. Even for the data other than official statistics, it is not satisfactory in terms of integration, reliability, and sustainability. So we launched Quicken project, in which we established a Nowcast portal using private data to quickly depict and provide detailed information on the economic and social impact caused by corona-like disaster. I'm sure you have heard of it a lot. Nowcast is a combination of now and forecast, which means describing or predicting the present so quickly as to be called real time. This slide demonstrates the output image of the Nowcast portal that is currently under development. Basically, we benchmarked the economic tracker that is operated by US Opportunity Insight and customized it considering the strategic importance and the data availability of Korea. 10 indicators from 4 parts of consumers, businesses, especially small business, jobs, and COVID-19 will be available on the Nowcast portal. These indicators will be provided with comparative variables for detailed analysis. For example, income levels for consumers and detailed industry classifications for businesses. We expect users to easily understand socioeconomic phenomena through this visible and intuitive system. We are using data from 8 private companies and 3 public institutions to generate indicators. These are generally the top market share companies in this field. It has been 3 months since we launched this Nowcast portal project in June this year. This slide shows the workflow that we have experienced in this job project so far. Because it is based on private data, there is a significant difference from the traditional work. For example, the ability to find out which private companies have the data we wanted and negotiate with appropriate decision makers, and the expertise to define data requirements without directly processing their data, and etc. Currently, we are assessing the acquired data for their representativeness, coverage, and stability, and undertaking benchmark analysis by comparing them with official statistics. We expect to complete this project for its public service by the end of this year. This concludes my presentation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Yun. Very, very interesting. Much to discuss. So our next speaker will actually be presented by video is Mr. Shahar Karif Al-Shawabak from the Department of Statistics in Jordan. So Mr. Sharif, I invite you to play your video, and then he will be here in person for the discussion.
Hello everybody. First of all, I would like to thank UNSD and Korean Statistics for organizing this event and giving me an opportunity to present the impact of disaster on statistical operations and how have the national systems responded to them. Jordan has faced 2 crises during the past years. First, Syrian refugees. As a result of the circumstances surrounding the kingdom, Jordan has faced a wave of international migration since 2011 from the Syrian side, which led to the large population increase resulting from it and created pressure on the available resources such as natural resources, water, agricultural land, and the environment. And on the various type of community services provided, education, health, and housing. As a quick response by the Department of Statistics, it has provided a database from population census and other surveys related to the Syrian refugees residing on Jordanian lands, such as education, health, etc., which help to educate the decision makers on the extent of the refugee problem and enable them to take the appropriate decision. A set of questions related to the Syrian were added to some important household surveys, such as Household Income and Expenditure Survey. As a direct response by the Department of Statistics to the problem of Syrian refugees, a sample of the Household Income and Expenditure Survey 2021-2022 is designed to include the Syrian refugees. This study is a unique source for calculating average income and expenditure, including spending on food commodities, and thus calculating poverty and food security indicators in the kingdom, making the necessary comparisons and studying the impact of refugees on it. Labor force survey. A set of questions related to Syrian were added to this survey to obtain demographic, social, and economic indicators related to Syrian residing in the kingdom and present them to policymakers to benefit from them in improving the services provided to the Syrian. Survey of impact Syrian refugees on the Jordanian labor market. This survey aims to know the impact of Syrian refugees on the Jordanian labor market and to collect data on the living conditions and the services provided to them. Survey of education, skills, experience, and separate fields of work among Syrian in Jordan. This survey aims to identify the educational skills of Syrian and experiences they have and the field of work they prefer. Second, COVID-19 pandemic. Jordan has been directly affected in all aspects of life and sectors by the pandemic, and its impact had led to pressure on all the kingdom resources, especially on the economic and health sector, and the closure that took place as part of the Jordanian government endeavors to preserve the health of the citizen. Thus has provided available population, economic and agricultural data in a way that help decision makers taking appropriate measures, such as using the data from the agricultural census to organizing movement permits during the lockdown period. As a response and adaptation to the conditions of closure and health precaution, the technical directorates modified their procedure for implementing surveys to reduce field visit by integrating the number of rounds and visits for respondents, especially those that included several visits during the year, and modifying methodologies and electronic program prepared for data collection in line with the epidemiological conditions. As an initiative of the department and partners, and due to the urgent need to provide data on the pandemic, the department has carried out the following surveys. COVID-19 impact on Jordanian household. As a result of the pandemic conditions, the survey was carried out by phone on sample of about 12,000 Jordanian households distributed over all governorates. The data collection process started on October 2020 and completed during the first half of November 2020. Job Transformation Survey 2020. The department conducted this survey by phone on October 2020 in cooperation with the Ministry of Labor and the Royal Court. The sample size was about 11,000 individuals who were selected through the second round 2020 labor force survey to know the impact of the pandemic on individuals in the Jordanian labor market during the period of the closure of economic sectors. Labor force survey. As a speedy response and as a result of what the world in general and Jordan in particular has witnessed from the spread of the coronavirus, it was necessary for the DOS to make some changes to the questionnaire of second round of labor force survey 2020 by adding questions related to the pandemic and deleting some other questions to reduce the burden of interviews on households. DOS implemented the project of measuring the impact of the policies applied in Jordan on society during the pandemic period through big data and non-traditional data in cooperation with Cisco. This project aims to support decision makers with non-traditional data as an alternative in the event that traditional data cannot be obtained, as happened during the period of the comprehensive lockdown. Data were collected for 5 different policies covering different sectors: education, DARSEC platform, work, health and poverty, and implementing 8 policies for people with disabilities. A platform was developed to present the analytical result of this data, and it was presented to all relevant ministers and institutions to benefit from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shabawar. So now, turning to our last speaker, we move further south down to South Africa, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Rusenga Butler Muleke, who's the Statistician General in Statistics South Africa, who will talk us through how their national statistical system responded to the global pandemic. Rusenga, the floor is yours.
Thank you indeed, facilitator, and of course, let me appreciate the time and the opportunity that our colleagues in Korea have made arrangements for this. I want us to start about the times we are living in. We are living in times of powerful disruptions that are happening at the global level. And in our case as Statistics South Africa, just before COVID, our strategy had expired. Our 5-year strategy had expired. And we came in with a new strategy that said we want to improve lives through data ecosystems, which was our vision. And in doing so, our strategic plan was set to embrace an ambitious path of taking forward transformation through the way we work and the way we do things by being responsive to user demands and harnessing ecosystems. In doing so, we looked at areas of where we would be operating. And one of them was putting in place a space of insightful data, a space in which data would tend to go a further step and deal with issues that society demands. The second area was the agility of our operating model, that it should be able to withstand the shocks within the system internally in the country and globally, And we also looked at interconnected statistical systems, where we would expand in relation to the work that we do as a statistical agency, but also other systems globally, as well as within our country, other producers that are key players in statistical production. And no doubt, we had to transform our capabilities as an organization to be responsive enough in moving forward. So these 4 strategic outcomes were very critical in dealing with change on the one side and continuity on the second side. Now, COVID-19 disruptions, as they've done to everyone in the world, took us by surprise. But as they took us by surprise in changing every facet of life and indeed every aspect of life, we were found ready as an organization because it offered us an opportunity to fast track our strategic intent. That is starting to look at alternative methodologies and technologies of doing work. The targets in our work program have been affected. We are required by Parliament to submit a work program every year. And we even had to revise them in relation or as a response to COVID. And in revising them, we had to reprioritize our activities, our resources and funding to ensure that we do not fail as a statistical agency. So what happened to data collection in the field? And that was the impact on the processes and methodologies. Data collection in the field, we had to start using alternative approaches and deploy as much possible of such alternative methodologies in the hybrid form as much possible. In terms of businesses and local government institutions, we had to deal with things differently and they were impacted. I must admit this is largely in our economic statistics of dealing with businesses and local government. And I will come to a case study particularly that relates to our quarterly labor force survey that explains what we did. Firstly, the restrictions imposed upon by COVID-19 created an obstacle in terms of normal data collection approaches as well as operations. And in terms of where there was no movement of people in the country, at some stage, at our highest level of lockdown, movement was highly restricted in the country, except for essential services. And in relation to our quarterly labor force survey, what we did was to move from computer-assisted personal interviews to telephone-assisted telephone interviews in a manner, let me correct that, my apologies. We changed our method of collection to computer-assisted telephone interviews. And in doing so, we looked at the first quarter of 2020 to the second quarter of 2021 and realized that because of the limitations, we couldn't even do rotations. We only were able to go in the second quarter of 2021 in the form of implementing the rotations in our sample. But of course, because not all dwellings had telephone numbers, and that would introduce a bias. And we had to go back to the first quarter of 2020, which was the last quarter that we collected before COVID hits us, as a control quarter to be able to ease out the bias. And I think I would want to encourage everyone to go on our website and see successive reports of every quarter in the manner in which we have dealt with easing out the bias in relation to our quarterly labor force survey. Because when you deal with a situation where not everyone has contacts and you have a control quarter that you last collected, that becomes handy. And as I said at the beginning, that our lives as statistical agencies had more challenges in wanting to come up with creative ways in our methodologies. Now, let us look at how staff were impacted. Management, especially senior management, were impacted in that we had to work in a hybrid way. We had to work from office and home. One is you want to minimize infections, so you try as much to stay away from office. But also you have a lot of professional and technical staff members who had to work from office where possible. And you need to keep them encouraged. So you need to keep the morale high of staff members. And from time to time, as a management or senior leadership of the organization, we're to make sure that we show face in person in the buildings. We have one head office, 9 provincial offices, and 52 district offices. And it had to apply that all our staff members should at least see the face of leadership once a week where possible. And where not possible, management had to deal with issues a lot more differently. Data collection where possible, staff members had to work from home, especially where they had facilities where they could call into the respondents in the form of telephones and capture online while they are the respondents are feeding them with the information that they needed. Now, what is it that we do or we did in terms of responding to emerging data needs? Because the nation had data needs. One is that we launched an online business impact COVID-19 pandemic survey in South Africa, where businesses were asked on how the crisis was impacting on their operations during the lockdown. The second survey was, maybe before I come to that, let me deal with this one. The survey was done on 3 occasions, and it came in very handy and very helpful in relation to needs by users as well as policy makers. We launched an essential product consumer price index weekly in April 2020. The third one was an online survey on the impact of COVID-19 in the society, which came in 3 waves. The first wave was health and behavioral issues and perceptions that relate to that. The second one had to do with employment and income, including hunger. The third one had to do with education and time spent. All these online surveys were very critical. And I want to specifically pick up on the one on health, behavior, and perceptions, where we were able to pick up that members of the public could not venture to go out there and collect instead those who are on chronic medication, could not step out to go and collect their medications in time for 2 reasons. One is that they were afraid of infections. Secondly, they were afraid that they would contravene the lockdown rules. And in this regard, when we brought this to policymakers, they were able to improve in the way services have to reach out, especially to the young and the elderly, who essential services for them, especially in relation to medication, was being impacted. About 8% of our population, of the respondents, had indicated that they were being impacted in relation to this. So it was quite interesting how speedily policymakers could turn around and implement some or use some of the products that we're making available during the hardest levels of lockdown. The next slide seems to want to say, I end here, facilitator and program director for the session. And the slide that comes after this one is blank. I thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's hard to argue with your slides. If they say it's over, it's over. So I'd like to thank all the speakers for their presentations. And now we can move to the discussion session. So if anybody would like to post questions, please feel free. But what I'd like to do is ask, to begin by asking some general questions. What we've seen there's kind of a consistency of message that basically we've relied more on methodological adaptations and reliance on ICT to weather the storm. But I have a couple of kind of general questions which I can put to all of you. So the first one is, can we take anything useful from the last 18 months? So in other words, can NSOs or national statistical systems, that they've made a number of changes to survive the last 18 months. Are some of those changes going to remain post-pandemic? Like assuming COVID ends at some point, have permanent changes arisen from this period? Or will NSOs go back to the traditional methods post-pandemic? So I'll start with Alberto, who's kind of got a general view across the globe. So I'm just wondering what his thoughts are, and then I'll move on through the other speakers.
Yes, thank you. No, that's a great question. And to answer that, maybe I'll put on my other hat, which is that of a member of the Living Standard Measurement Study team. So, I mean, my main job is to work with countries on living condition surveys in countries. And we also had to transition to assisting countries actually doing phone surveys instead of face-to-face. And what we're trying to think now is how, as we go back to the field, we can actually integrate the face-to-face methods with the phone survey methods. There are a lot of areas or domains of data collection where having more frequent data would help. I'm thinking about seasonal data on agricultural labor input data, which is very difficult to collect with a longer recall period. And so areas where combining the phone mode with the face-to-face mode could both alleviate the burden on the face-to-face interviews, but also provide richer data in general to the analysts. So that's an area where we want to explore and make sure that we don't go back to business as usual, but use the lessons learned over the last 12, 18 months in phone survey interviews, which in many of the lower income countries in which we work had not been done at scale before. And so use those lessons going forward, making sure that we take stock of those and that we transition to a new, let's say, mixed mode system, which can be more efficient and more rich in terms of information.
Thanks, Alberto. Edwin, can I ask you the same question? Because it seems that the transition for CBS wasn't very traumatic. It seems like you were in quite a good position. So are there kind of permanent changes that will come out of this experience, do you think?
I think so, yes. Well, the first and most obvious one is that we will not be returning to the way we worked at CBS before the pandemic. We're moving towards a system of what we call hybrid working, part of which involves working from home on days that you would like to work at home, and let's say 2, maximum 3 days a week at work. Our entire office has been redesigned or is in the process of being redesigned. We have meeting rooms with screens that allow you to immediately contact a whole team of people through Zoom, large screens, good infrastructure. We don't know what it's like to work in that environment yet because we haven't actually been there, but the whole idea is that it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to be working from wherever you may be. We don't expect to have many conferences in the old ways, actually, moving to other countries, flying to other areas, other than by train, perhaps. What we're also doing on a different note is that we're now more actively tracking the way our society develops. We have what is called the Monitor of Wellbeing and Sustainable Development Goals, which we've been developing since 2018, and it uses about 350 indicators, of which 70 are key indicators, to track the development of Dutch society, economy, and biosphere. So we're looking at well-being here and now, well-being later, which relates to what we leave for the future generation, and well-being elsewhere, which relates to the way we impact other countries in the world. And we're using that now more actively, or going to use it now more actively, to provide a broad perspective on the most recent developments in Dutch society. So that if a pandemic like this or another exogenous shock like this happens again, we have an immediate view of all the aspects that may be affected. Part of that monitor since last year is a dashboard on resilience, so that we can see to what extent our society is prepared for the next exogenous shock, should it happen. That basically consists of a number of structural characteristics related to the major systems that underlie our way of life, our biosphere, our society, our economy, in that order, actually. And also statistics on the size of vulnerable groups. For example, people who work part-time, people who are poor, people are at the bottom of the income distribution. All of those might be affected first if, for example, mass unemployment happens, or our economy is cut off from abroad like it was last year. So this, in a nutshell, are the two main changes that I can see coming.
Okay, thanks, Edwin. Ms. Yoon, if I can turn to you and ask you a variant of the same question. You mentioned that COSTAT began nowcasting. I'm wondering what you think, because my impression is a lot of national statistical offices have been reluctant to nowcast, so that they want to publish collected or measured statistics, and they're nervous about modeled estimates. Do you think either in Korea or more generally, national statistical offices will be less reluctant to begin publishing modeled estimates for key indicators in the future?
네, 일단 질문에 답변을 드리자면은
Thank you very much. If I answer your question,
전체를 정확하게 설명하지 못하는 통계에 대한
with
거부감은
private sector data, we
있었습니다.
also have reluctance in fully using civil data, private sector data. But for us to have detailed and more prompt data,
제도를 저희가
we have
만들어서
introduced an experimental statistics system. So a different analysis is possible compared with official statistics. And as our two previous speakers mentioned, I'd like to answer your question just as our two previous speakers. Response rate is low during COVID-19. This is a serious issue. And this was serious even before COVID-19, and even before COVID-19 subsides. I think it's difficult to fully overcome issues with in-person surveys. As I mentioned in my presentation, the use of alternative data is a challenge that we must tackle. For example, data from the National Tax Service or financial data, which is sensitive. We need to ensure that we protect personal data and also ensure that data is fully linked. And also it is necessary that we could apply AI, artificial intelligence, to those areas that are not fully identified. So these would be our future challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shawabka, turning to you, your presentation was fascinating because you're dealing with two crises simultaneously. So I was wondering, as you modernized your system, did you have to develop all the time two different strategies for the two different populations? Or were you able to, like, for example, if you were using a secondary data source, could you use it for both populations, the Jordanian population and the Syrian refugee population? Or all the time do you have to develop two different strategies?
Thank you, Mr. Stephen. Actually, before the pandemic, it was not permitted to enumerators to collect data by phone. But during after the pandemic, it was a good experience to collect data by phone, and we will continue collect data by phone in addition to face-to-face. And
we will depend on the administrative sources to collect another data, and we have linked the department with another institutions to get electronic data from them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to start a new round of questions, but I'll reverse the order. So I'll stick with you, Mr. Shaboka. My next question is, given the demand for urgent or timely data during a crisis, do you think that traditionally one of the problems has been access to private data, to secondary data? Has the public's attitude towards privacy changed during the pandemic? So in other words, are the public less concerned about privacy now and more willing to allow the Statistical Office to access new types of data?
I think the collection of the data now is easy, and the respondent are cooperate with us to collect the data by phone, and also we are now we are going to collect data from the Syrian refugees for the first time by face-to-face.
Thanks. Rasinga, can I ask you the same question? Do you think, have attitudes in South Africa changed to privacy because of the demand for urgent data? Are people less concerned now about kind of the Statistics Office accessing administrative data or big data? You're still mute, Rasinga.
Oh, my apologies, my apologies. The new normal requires us to unmute all the time. Firstly is that at the hardest level of lockdown, the public was much more willing to share with us much information as possible. Because I think when COVID-19 hit our shores, everyone wanted information here and now and urgently. And the public's attitude was that provide as much information as possible. But then right towards the end of last year, 2020, a new act which had been in the pipeline was promulgated, and Parliament had been working on that. The POPIA Act, which is the Protection of Private Information Act, and in this regard, or Personal Information Act. And in this regard, it made only those who traditionally were never willing to share information, because as a statistical agency, you always have a section of a society or a group of individuals that are not willing to cooperate. So it made them galvanize their stance in relation to not willing to share information. But our standing as a statistical agency for having protected personal information in the form of treating all information with confidentiality all along has worked well for us. But in the end, even with the new act coming into place, we find that attitudes in the public are much more that we should be able to share as much information with the National Statistical Agency for purposes of work. But having said that, I think there is another dynamic which is not which is compounded by COVID-19, but which is emerging. The whole issue of personal information or information out there and social media all over the world is making people think differently about how they make their information available to the public. And I think as statistical agencies, we must ready ourselves even beyond COVID to deal with this matter. And even when this information falls in the wrong hands, because when it falls in the wrong hands, we will be amongst the first ones as statistical agencies to face accusations that we have made information available to yourselves, even if it didn't actually leak of land in the wrong hands through ourselves. So I think we must go beyond the COVID environment to ready ourselves as NSOs and the entire systems of national statistics in our respective countries and globally. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruzinga. Interesting. Ms. Yoon, you're the director of big data in COSTAT. I'm wondering, have you seen a change in attitude in terms of accessing new secondary data sources? Is it easier now to get access to big data given the demands for urgent information?
Recently, we have passed 3 major data laws in Korea. This is to make sure that data is transparently used. But in leveraging data, data providers can be reluctant, so we cannot force them to just share. So in the Nowcast portal project, what we wanted to do was to ensure that we only use summary data, so we were able to convince data providers that data protection is ensured. Under the theme of overcoming COVID-19, we persuaded social enterprises so that they could join and share data with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Edwin, you mentioned the challenges of privacy in kind of the Dutch history, but having said that, you've been long-time users of administrative data, and certainly one of the statistical offices pioneering the use of big data. So I'm just wondering, have you seen any attitudinal changes?
Well, attention for privacy is not something that came up during the COVID pandemic. It's much older. Just to give you one example of something that happened just during the first start of the pandemic, there's a lot of attention always from the media for everything that CBS does with big data sets, especially when we use private data sets. We had an agreement with T-Mobile, one of the Dutch telecom providers, who provided us with access to some of their data of mobile users, which we then used in an experiment to see if we could predict how busy it would be at any time of the day in Amsterdam. This was a big data experiment, and the aim was to identify an estimate of the number of people with a telephone in certain areas in Amsterdam to see how busy it would be at certain times of the day, how many tourists there are, etc. It was all done exactly according to our privacy laws. It was extremely well organized in the sense that no CBS researcher ever got access to the actual data. We got anonymized metadata. It was all very carefully done. But even so, in the press, there was suddenly an upheaval about the way that Statistics Netherlands got access to your private data, exactly knows your phone number, what you do with your telephone, whom you call, etc. It was blown up beyond proportion. This was just one of those experiments where on the inside, everything is very carefully done, but our image on the outside is suddenly endangered by, well, actually careless reporting in this case. So we're always very careful to do everything according to privacy regulations. We have a privacy officer who's actually in the employ of Statistics Netherlands, but also part of our National Privacy Watchdog, which is an independent organization. And any experiment using big data or other administrative data or private data is always carefully laid against the law. I had one side note about nowcasting, actually, a short one. We already do a lot of modeling. Most of the data produced at Statistics Netherlands involve a degree of modeling, sometimes extensively, for example, input-output tables, and sometimes at least to support it. Nowcasting was already done before COVID came along, and whenever we nowcast, it's never done beyond the current year. It's always done using supporting information. We don't extrapolate trends, and it's always done with an extensive footnotes showing the status and the methodology that was used. And it's always also done with the support of our methodological division. It's not something that we allow experts to do on their own account. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Edwin. So apologies, Alberto. I had a question for you about maybe the growing divide between kind of developing and developed countries, but I'm getting messages from our organizers that we're already out of time. So all that remains me to do is to thank Alberto, to thank Edwin, Ms. Yun, Mr. Shawabaka, and Rasinga for their insightful presentations and answers. I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation that's going to go on. This is the beginning, we hope, of the end of the global pandemic, but hopefully there's lessons that we can take from this that will actually help us to innovate and modernize our national statistical systems into the future. So with that, thanks everybody. Thanks for tuning in and listening. I hope you found the session interesting and worthwhile. And from that, I just wish you all a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
day.
Thank you indeed. Thank you very much.
This concludes session 4, Part B. Let me thank Mr. McFilly and the panelists for this great session, and we're sorry that we have to stop you in the middle. Now, let me introduce the chair for session 5, Part B. Ms. Claire Melamede, CEO of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, GPSDD, oversees the work of global team at the GPSDD for equitable, responsible, and sustained data use for development. She was previously managing director of the Overseas Development Institute, and in 2014, she worked in the office of the UN Secretary General, writing a World That Counts report. She is an affiliated researcher at the University of Cambridge and serves on a number of boards and advisory groups, including in the Data Science Campus of the UK Office of National Statistics and the Overseas Development Institute's Human Mobility Initiative. So, let me invite Ms. Melamede to chair session 5, Part B.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I'm sure, to some of you. A very warm welcome to this session. Thank you so much for joining us. As you can see, I'm sure, from the literature in front of you, we've got a really fantastic panel to talk about, I think, what, I'm sure has come up in previous sessions of this conference. One of the really issues which I think is front of mind for many statisticians and for those who rely on the statistics that they produce to make policy, to allocate resources, and to track progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. The combination of the COVID pandemic that we are all still living through and the looming climate crisis has, I think, really thrown up for all of us the urgency of having data that can reflect the world that we live in now, that can provide timely information for policymakers confronting crises that change day by day, sometimes hour by hour, and the need to have data that can rise to the occasion and plot the way forward and the way out of the many crises that confront us. This obviously requires a great deal of statisticians, requires them to work in new ways, to create new partnerships, but still to hold on to the methods, the rigor, and the methodologies that have guided statistics since its earliest days. And really, I think that the art for all of us in coming months and years is to combine those things, is to combine the rigor and the robustness of statistical methods and the data that is produced and the certainty that those statistics can give us, but also to give us the benefit of new methods, new data sources, new ways of doing things that can shed light on some of the critical challenges that confront us. So really happy today to have a conversation drawn from many different perspectives of this important issue. We've got people on our panel who will be talking about data solutions and the partnerships that are required to put them into practice from a number of different perspectives. We have Mr. Alex Caldas, who'll be speaking first, the Chief of Service at the Information Technology Knowledge Management section at UNEP. Now, UNEP, obviously, as a specialized UN agency, have been in the forefront of developing the products, the methods that have been widely used by many countries as they've tried to improve their data systems to get their data systems fit for purpose to tackle the climate challenges that we face. We're also, I will introduce the other speakers as they come up, but really happy to say we also have perspectives, not just from the UN agency, also from regional bodies, and critically from statistics offices within governments, those really at the sharp end of using new products, developing new partnerships to provide that critical information to the policymakers, who we hope will help to get us out of the many crises that we confront as a world. But let's hear first from Alex. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone, and thank you, Claire, for the introduction. I'd like to thank the organizers for this excellent opportunity to share with you some ideas on how the criticality of integration of geospatial with statistics, because I think that's a very critical point in going forward in making action through the use of intelligent data. So that's one key point of my idea sharing with you today. The other second key point is about partnerships, because in fact, only through partnerships we can scale up to the level that we need to tackle these complex problems that we face at hand. And one of these particular partnerships, and I'm very glad on behalf of the UN Geospatial Network, 37 agencies of the UN system that come together to try to bring coordination across geospatial across the UN system. And you can see in the screen that the overall architecture of the UN GGIM, but then you have the different thematic networks where with the private network, academic, geospatial, but also the United Nations system network. And today I would like to bring to you some of the strategy, the structure and the activities that we are undergoing in order to bring partnership to and value to the use of geospatial and statistics together. This network was established much before, based on the group of the working group on across the UN system, the WIN, that run for 20 years. But in 2017, we built a network in order to bring through coherence and coordination across the UN system on the use of geospatial. I'm glad to report that we have grown from 26 agencies, funds and programs to 37. So there was, in 2 years' time, a significant growth of this partnership. But more significantly, we have strengthened through the pursuing specific objectives, the coordination and collaboration and sharing across the UN system and different agencies. We had these objectives in mind. Also, the communication and awareness across the UN system on the use of geospatial statistics. Of course, making availability and accessibility of coordinated geospatial activities and mandates of the different agencies, and the relevance on pursuing the different mandates and aims of the different agencies through the UN GGIM architecture. You can see here how wide is the scope of what we're talking about. I'm glad to report, of course, this is not possible as I'm keeping my message clear without a true partnership, without true engagement in collaboration, in scaling up. It's impossible to think 2 years in the past, and to think how much we have grown working FAO with WFP, with ITU, with the World Bank, with the Secretary Des and the YCT, and so on and so forth. I think that's a clear message. I will not spend too much time on the structure. It's a very clean structure reporting to the UN GGIM. I'm glad, of course, in the leadership UNEP, also UNFPA in the past, and the UNICEF, and now with the UNOSAT, we're bringing coherence to all these. Let me just focus on some key strategic orientations we are putting forward: the governance, technology, and people. So we're following very much the overall framework of the integrated geospatial information management framework, in order that we can be useful not only for the UN system but also for the member states. The three key strategic pillars we're following up is the governance, technology, and people. And in the past, we have put together the blueprint strategy document, which guides us in terms of transformation pathways to move forward. That's the image of the blueprint and the landscape we launched 2 years ago. This year, we are launching more in terms of action. We launch a website where you can have all this information. But this year, we're launching Geospatial in Action. We have selected 21 demonstration projects across the UN system on the use of geospatial, and that's Geospatial in Action. And we are launching Geospatial for Humanity, which is how to use geospatial for tackling the COVID-19 pandemic. So basically, this is an example of reporting on the different things. Let me just focus on one key deliverable that can show you how important it is, this partnership. Generic job geospatial descriptions. We've put forward, and it was, I'm glad to report that was approved by the Human Resource Department of the UN, a generic geospatial job description that goes from the top levels to the assistant and support levels. And this is available not only for the agencies, funds, and programs of the UN system, but it's also available, it's relevant to the member states. So this is one area that demonstrates it's impossible to do these things without true partnerships, without collaboration across the system, without collaboration across the whole different actors involved in all of these. I don't think I should go forward. So we have here just one final message. We're happy that we have collaborated more intensively with the Committee of Coordination of Statistical Activities, and we had 4 sessions, a workshop to answer the question how to bridge geospatial scientists, geospatial actors with statisticians. And we came forward with a nice plan of action to work together and how to bring geospatial information together with statistics information in order that this can be useful for the member states, this can be useful for across the system and to the world. With this, I think I will not go forward, and I know that the time is strict for all the colleagues in the panel, the excellent colleagues in the panel. Let me just finish as I started. Basically, I'm happy. I just shared the presentation to all of you. If you want to have a look in more detail, I'm just like to hand with, as I started, the 2 keywords. One is partnerships, which is collaboration across the system and with the member states in order to scale up, in order to leverage and to have impact. And the second one is how important it is to integrate geospatial into the statistics in order that the action and decision-driven action can be enacted and can have a real impact, a true impact. And with this, I'd like to thank, of course, all the colleagues on the UN Geospatial Network, the UN GGIM, and of course, Statistics Division, the organizers, for this excellent opportunity. Thank you very much, and over to you, Claire, again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you for sharing that with us. And I think GGIM has been a real model for all of us in how partnership can work across the UN. And I think, like you, absolutely, would like to recognise the huge efforts of many colleagues. I have one quick follow-up question, if I may, which is, in my experience of working on partnerships now over many years, it seems to me often that partnerships at the technical level, as you've suggested, at the sort of individual staff level, are relatively straightforward. People want to work together. They want to learn from each other. They enjoy having colleagues with whom to sort of exchange ideas and so on. But at the institutional level are sometimes more challenging, because obviously institutions have their own inertia, their own political position to safeguard and so on. So I wondered if you, from the perspective of creating those partnerships that operate both at a technical level, but also at an institutional level between some quite complex dynamics within the UN system, if you have any guidance to offer others for how to really get those partnerships developed at the institutional level as well as the individual level.
Thank you so much. It is an excellent question, Claire. I fully agree with you. I think one fundamental keyword for tackling that problem is leadership. So it needs to have a clear leadership in place in order to make sure that it's strong enough to pursue specific lines of action. The second one is a clear strategic blueprint. And that was the reason why together the first key 2 years were the foundational pillars was to establish which are the strategic areas that we want to focus. So I would say leadership together with focus, with a clear blueprint of the transformation areas. And that gave us, it took time, it took us 2 years, 1 year, 1 full year to come out with a blueprint, but then the areas were clear, and we have an agreement across the 37 agencies, funds and departments, even institutionally, how to go about and where to focus exactly on delivering that. And of course, the third keyword is relevance. So I do think sometimes institutions spend too much time on irrelevant pathways, whereas if one focus on the relevant ones, to give a clear example with us, the generic geospatial job descriptions was a result of the first year work, and that came out with a relevant topic that needed to be addressed. A second one that we're tackling very much soon is how to have procurement of satellite imagery at a level that is economizing and mobilizing resources across the UN system in a way that to leverage again the power of the partnership and the network. So I would say leadership, very strong strategy and focus, and third, relevance and impact on specific topics. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. No, really helpful, and themes that I'm very sure that we will return to in through the discussion. Thank you so much, Alex. So let me turn now to Ms. Rikke Munch-Hansen, who is the officer in charge at the Statistics Division in UNESCAP. Obviously, as well as the work of the individual specialist agencies, the UN has a huge role through the regional commissions in coordination, in knowledge sharing, and really enabling and scaling up the work of individual member states, as well as adding their own expertise, technical expertise through the work of the Secretariat. So UNESCAP and many of its member states have been leaders in the area of innovation and new partnerships. So to tell us more about that, over to you, Rikke.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Claire, for the introduction. And it's my pleasure to give this presentation today. And I thought it would be appropriate if I bring some perspectives from the broader Asia and the Pacific region, and specifically given that my friends and colleagues at Stats Korea are hosting this conference. So what I've focused on is really the word transformation in the rather long blurb surrounding this session. First, I want to talk a bit about the case for transformation. And Claire, you already pointed to the need for statistics and data for the SDGs in your introduction. So I think this will pick up nicely from that. Well, what you see on this slide is one reason for why we need to transform. I mean, we are well into the SDGs and the Agenda 2030 in terms of time, And what you see here is the data availability for being able to track progress in Asia and the Pacific. And we've seen over the years that the availability of data is improving, but it's still poor. And it's too poor. It's poorer than what it really should be at this point in time. We still have 129 SDG indicators that do not have sufficient data to be able to measure progress for Asia and the Pacific. And if we look at some specific goals, goals 5, 11, and 14, which are the data poorest goals, we actually have insufficient or totally missing data for 80% or more of the SDG indicators in those goals. So there is a humongous need for transformation, for being able to increase the availability of the statistics and data we need for decision making, but also, of course, for monitoring our joint global commitments. So talking about commitments and looking again at the Asia and the Pacific, well, the commitments are there. The chief statisticians have come together around a shared vision, and you see it on this slide. I'm not going to read out the details. The vision is underpinned by a number of priority areas, which is what you see in the bubbles. And what I've done here is to highlight and put in red some words: engaging, timely, involving, innovative, modernizing, integrated. And the reason I've done that is to demonstrate that this transformation thinking really underpins the commitments that the chief statisticians in Asia and the Pacific have made towards statistics for the 2030 agenda. Beyond the statisticians and going through a whole of government lens here, there's also commitments in Asia and the Pacific. All the governments have come together also in support of national statistics. And they have actually made 9 commitments, which really underpins what they feel is needed from the whole of government to be able to support the statistical institutions, transform and improve. And again, I've put in highlight, bold and red a few words. What you see here in some of these bubbles is the word empower, empowerment, frontier technologies, advocacy, and also culture. And again, we look at transformative actions and commitments here. And I want just a few words about the word culture, because we talk a lot about transformation in terms of, well, we've just heard on geospatial data, etc. But what actually underpins every single discussion is that the culture in statistical institutions, but also in societies at large, is the need to have a different culture surrounding the use of data and the increased use for data in decision-making processes, whether we talk about governments or whether we talk about decisions that each individual is making on, you know, our plans for the future. Now, what I've just shown you are sort of the commitments from the high powers and the high levels of government. And of course, what we do in a regional commission like ESCAP is to convene and facilitate a number of discussions where anyone with an interest for statistics or a career in statistics is welcome to join. And what can really characterize the discussions during the past 18 months is what I've put on this slide as the COVID-19 factor, which to me is another, actually it's become a transformation word in the statistical community. If you look at some of the statements here I've put in bubbles, sort of voices from the region here, you'll note that an overwhelming majority are actually very positive. They are talking about the opportunities that COVID-19 have offered, talking about a momentum for increased big data use, momentum for modernizing data dissemination, increased demand and increased popularity of statisticians, new innovative data collection methods, opportunities for new partnerships, which is one of the things we are discussing in this session, opportunity to get new customers. There's a few concerns, of course, as well. And one of them is, well, there is a need for training. We need to find out how to ensure business continuity, which is an overriding concern. Another one is a concern that relates to the different, let's say, dimensions of statistics quality. And there is a concern that the focus on relevance, timeliness, frequency, and granularity, which is very much at front and center of demands related to the pandemic, are we focusing on these at the cost of another quality dimension, accuracy? So this is just a little snapshot of what we are hearing from Asia and the Pacific. I have a feature slide here on big data, and I actually inserted that in my presentation because of the discussions that have taken place during the first day of this conference, because there is so much interest on this topic. And we've been digging a bit into that in ESCAP, looking around the region and trying to respond to a few main questions. One of them is, well, how many examples can we find of big data used for SDG indicators? What we find is 156 examples. It sounds like a lot, but you'll also note on the slide here, the Philippines are behind a lot of them. We see examples that citizen-generated data, geospatial data, and mobile phone data are being used. Another question, how many of these examples were actually from national statistical offices? 103 of them. But that number dwindles down to 24 if we exclude the Philippines. And these examples from NSOs, again, are on geospatial, mobile phone, and citizen-generated data. So what are the popular SDG indicators in terms of the number of examples? That was indicator 15.1.1. That's about forest area, the percentage of the total land area. And another last question, well, which indicator had the highest number of examples from national statistical offices? That was indicator 131, which is the proportion of the population that's covered by social insurance programs. So I should stress also that many of the examples we found are the result of experiments. They may not be fully integrated into the regular production of statistics. Here, a little snapshot, if anyone needs some inspiration in your own transformation journeys. I've put a lot of links to different resources that are produced by ESCAP and partners. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, we do convene a lot of conversations, and I've also put the logos of a few here: the Global Ocean Accounts Partnership, the Civil Registration and Vital Statistics Decade, and what has turned out being very popular weekly events, our statistics or stats cafes, which is something that all of you are very welcome to attend, whether you are from Asia and the Pacific or beyond. And we do enjoy participation from the whole world in these cafes. Finally, a few key messages here when we talk about transformation. If we look at the 2030 agenda,
need to wrap up very quickly.
Yeah, this is my last slide, Claire. If we look at the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, well, clearly there's a push for innovation here. It includes institutional settings, data sources, methods, partnership, and new conversations. We all need to work together in a national statistical system, and the statistical offices need to recognize they're not the only players in the national data ecosystem, and they need to transform their role, responsibilities, partners, services, and products accordingly. Users need to be involved. And finally, underpinning everything is institutional transformation, which is something you just mentioned, Claire, is as essential as statistical transformation. So with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Rika. Lots of themes there that I'm sure will come up as we go through the discussion. I won't ask you about it now, but I think one thing I'm really interested in following up on is the barriers. You know, we see, I think from your presentation, there's a lot of enthusiasm, there's a lot of potential, as you and Alex have both shown us, but that slide on the actual examples of use shows, I think, relative, you know, perhaps a smaller number of countries actually using new methods than you might expect, or, you know, than we might hope, given what is available and the level of interest that's out there. So I think it'd be interesting for all of us to reflect on what are the barriers to adoption and use of new technologies and new data sources, and some of the specific experiences that we have in overcoming those barriers. That's certainly the main aim of the work that we do in the Global Partnership, and working with the UN Statistics Division and the World Bank under the Data for Now initiative that we may talk about during the session. But let me now turn to invite Kevin up to the virtual panel. Mr. Kevin Mccormack is the head of division of the SDGs in the Central Statistics Office in Ireland, which I assume means, Kevin, that you're essentially responsible for the SDGs in Ireland. Is that
yes.
right?
Certainly from a statistical perspective, from CSO, Central Statistics Office.
Please,
okay, can you see?
Over to you.
So can you see my presentation? Yes. I always ask the question. Okay, thank you. So I'm Kevin Mccormack, looking at Ireland's integrated response to COVID-19. Everyone has mentioned the SDGs before, so here's a quick one of the SDGs. Yet again, we have our 17 goals and so forth. I won't spend too long on it. I think everybody knows them. But in terms of Ireland, what we have done is that we have created partnerships. Sorry, that's gone forward. We created partnerships under the Federated Information System for SDGs. We're actually working with our colleagues, from Ordnance Survey, Geospatial, the department, and also then our Esri Ireland is our technical partners. We commenced the program in May 2017, and our goal was to develop and deploy a new approach for monitoring the UN SDGs using geographic information systems. And we have a little tag, which is the geospatial potential of statistical data. So role of CSO, of course, we have a central role in identification, management, presentation of the data needed to meet the requirements of the SDG indicators. And in our responsibility, of course, the CSO will deploy as far as possible the UNCE's generic statistical business process model. It has 8 phases and 34 subphases. So this is the foundation of the work within the CSO. I won't spend too long on it, but yet again, it's the generic statistical business process model. All work needs a foundation, and this is the work of the CSO. Now, in addition, of course, because we're working with our colleagues from Ordnance Survey Ireland, the geospatial area, we're looking at different frameworks. One that we're applying is also the Global Statistical Geospatial Framework, the famous GSGF. So this framework is a high-level framework which facilitates consistent production and integration approaches for geostatistical information. It is generic and permits application of the framework principles to the local circumstances of individual countries. In addition, we're also looking at the UN GGIM's Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, again, somewhat famous in this arena, called the IGIF. So the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework provides a basis and a guide for developing, integrating, and strengthening geospatial information management. Yet again, I won't spend too long on it, but it's a framework there. So you can see that we're building our work on solid ground dealing with the frameworks. In terms of the GSBPM and the GSGF, I'm part of UNCE working group on the high level of modernization of statistics, and we have mapped the GSBPM and the GSGF together, the principles. So this is a clear understanding that there is a link between the geospatial and statistical communities, and it is visualized here. Coming forward then, if we look at our project team, which is on the SDGs, we have information for 211 of the 224 indicators. 60 of these have a geospatial aspect, and we've created 100 plus data sets at different levels of geography. That's 3, then local area geography. We've also produced a portal using Esri technology, a web portal known as a GeoHive, where interested parties can openly look at the data, download the data, and there's also APIs there. We released the portal in 2017, and we further developed it in June of 19. So when you land on the portal, this is what you see. This is our landing page on our portal for the SDGs. 17 goals to transform our world. You go in further, then we look at how did we do it. So CSO is on the left-hand side here. So I am the coordinator for the SDG in Ireland. So I source the information that goes on our portal to report into the SDG indicators. So CSO Open Data Portal, we have an open data portal. So there, what we do is that we put on a geospatial identifier onto the Cisco data. We then upload it to the GeoHive platform, where people can visualize the information themselves. It also can be downloaded from that portal. People would like to visualize it not within an Esri environment, but in a different environment. The Geospatial portal or GeoHive is actually linked to the UN Statistical division, but you can also download directly from the CSO, and the users can download. And we're quite aware that many users do not have maybe the technology or the ability to interact with Esri software. So we have tutorials for R and Python in terms of visualization, and some of the examples are here on the right-hand side. So, of course, our portal is being well received across government, public sector, and civil society. The information contained in this portal will inform Ireland's progress against each goal. So we know there's a voluntary national report every 3 to 4 years, and it's our Department of Environment, Climate and Communications. The DEC has responsibility for officially reporting on Ireland's progress towards meeting the national SDG targets, and we support that particular government department in their work. So we have, in terms of partnerships, we have a governance board. So we have a CSO, OSI, Esri governance team. We meet weekly. In addition, we have a more general governance board, a UN SDGs governance board, various stakeholders from government departments and agencies and so forth. We meet on a quarterly basis. Our UN SDG data governance board, we have responsibility for the metadata, business glossaries, lifecycle management, and data quality. Okay. There's also a UN civil service high-level officials groups chaired by the DEC, and the CSO and OSI are invited members. So this group is actually charged with developing the official report on Ireland's progress toward the SDGs, the famous VNRs, and subsets of this group have official responsibility for the policy aspects of the individual groups. Okay. We also had an example of bringing statistical and geospatial community together. We looked at our census data. We have 98% of the dwellings have an address. We're able to link it together. And we also have from our OSI a Prime 2, which is a geographic data level files. So we were able to bring the two communities together in an example of work, which is measuring distance to everyday services. So what does it do? You look at here on the right-hand side and you'll see a dwelling, you see some services. We looked at GPs, we looked at hospitals, we looked at schools, libraries and so forth. And you're looking for the distance between, the average distance between dwellings and these services. And what we're able to do is produce a dashboard like this. So this is for what we call County Carlow. County Carlow is here on the right-hand side, a small county in Ireland, 56,932 individuals from census 2016. And here we can actually link in the percentage, which are 500 meters, a kilometer away to 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers and further away. The percentage of the population which are further are away from these different facilities. You have the fire stations, we have a Garda station, which is our police force, we have post offices, swimming pools, libraries, banks, and so forth. So yet again, it's a clear visualization of bringing statistics and geospatial data together. Okay, we also have a CSO hub for the SDGs. Yet again, we embrace the experience gained from using the Geospatial hub itself. We see our CSO hub is complementary, looking at different customers and users, of course. We have released up to 7 goals so far. These, yet again, they're electronic publications within a statistical environment through our normal communication channels within CSO. They've been very well received. In terms of the goals that we saw previously, we have a list of our goals. For example, here's the 17 goals. We're looking at 2020, or 244 indicators, should I say. We have sourced some information for 211 of them. So yet again, within our hub and CSO, our users can actually come and see this information and readily absorb it. Yet again, here's the publications. We have 1 publication for each goal. We have 8 completed. We're looking at 9, 10, and 11 and 12 so forth this year. So as we come through then, you land on our portal and you see on the right-hand side, when you land on the CSO's portal, you'll see all the different releases are here. Yet again, electronic environment, just click on these links and off you go. Information is there. Here is the infographics that we would have for it. Yet again, we try to bring geospatial and statistical data together. We try to make them informative. We've tried to make them look clear, interesting, colored, grab people's attentions. We have the headlines getting people through. We have the poverty, we have the hunger. Yet again, coming gender equality and affordable. Yet again, we're trying to reach into our users and get them enthused to work on it. Now, looking at the COVID-19, what did we do? So, okay, so there's a epidemiological modeling group was formed. Certainly, this actually supports the National Public Health Emergency Team. So this is the national team to respond to COVID-19. Because of the work that we had done on COVID-19, we were asked to form and join the team. So this team was expanded. We expanded to include Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, All Ireland Research Observatory, Maynooth University, and yet again, Esri Ireland as a technical partners. So the idea was for us to actually repeat what we had done for the SDGs for COVID-19. So how did we do it? So health authorities, of course, have the information. They don't usually share it, but in CSO, we have a Statistics Act of 1993, which allowed us to do it. You're able to then produce the information to the CSO, upload it to the hub. On the hub, we have different dashboards. There's the national hub here dashboard, yet again, very similar to a normal dashboard you see, geospatial and statistics together, but there's also internal dashboards. Internal dashboards, something like this one here on the bottom, is from road sensors, which is if there's a lockdown, you can tell the police force the numbers who are passing different points on the road networks. You also have an internal hub, which has been from our local authorities where people were ringing in looking for help and so forth. So that was there. Going forward, as I said, you've seen an image of the national hub. Yet again, we have 19 project partners coming through. It's been very well received. We said previously there's an internal version of this hub where people don't see it unless you're actually you're security cleared. On the internal hub, we'd have hospital admissions, discharge date, age patients, ICU beds, infections reported by geography, testing dates, referral dates, lab results, also geography. Now, what we have is electoral divisions, which are 349 geographies. And what we've been able to do is from there is deepen relationships with the health provider, support key national decision makers with the information that they require, evidence-based decision, of course, expand on the volume of key data and visualization tools, which are apps developed with key national stakeholder story maps on the national COVID-19 response, develop additional geospatial public hubs. Now, a story map or a visualization, this is what we did in terms of an animation. I think I produce buckets of 2 weekly periods, which is 14-day incident rates, and you're able to visualize them using an Esri app. So you can get a visualization coming through in terms of an animation. So these are just 3 slides that are there, but I've up to 70 together, and they will change every 30 seconds. And you can see the change at these levels here on the geography. These are LEAs, 166 of them. But you can also then go deeper to electoral divisions, which is 3,409. Just finished the very last one. Yep, very last one. So if you want to do on this slide, what you have is that it slides back and forth. One period on the left, another period on the right. 3,409 geographies. Yet again, the darker the color, the worse of the infection rates. You can move all the times that you would like and push back and forth, and you can see geography and statistics moving very quickly in terms of story maps. Okay, thank you. I'll finish there. And I went over by 1 minute and 25 seconds, and I apologize. I had my timer on myself. I apologize. Sorry for that.
Thank you so much. No, really, really interesting. And I think after when we've heard from our final speaker, I would love to hear a little bit more about use, about what information you have about who is using the platform, what they're using it for, the difference that it's made to the quality of decision making. Or to public accountability. There are many, where I'm sure there are many different groups who are using the platform itself and the visualizations that you're producing from that. But before we get to the issue of use, which I'm sure many of you will have a good perspective on, let me just, with great pleasure, introduce the final speaker on this panel, Mr. Yusuf Moranwa, who is the Director General of the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda. Rwanda have really led on the use of new methods, development of partnerships across Africa, both in terms of the national example and the contribution that they've made to regional and to global initiatives. And we're very proud to work with Yusuf and with others across the region on the Data for Now initiative that I mentioned with the UN, with the World Bank, and with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. But over to you, Yusuf. Thank you.
Can you see the presentation?
We could a minute ago, but it's just clicked off again. Yes, now you're screen sharing.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Claire. We've learned a lot in this crisis, especially in terms of doing statistics in a pandemic. And I will talk about three things. I'll talk about doing statistics in a crisis, pandemic, understanding the pandemic through statistics, of course, then some of the lessons that we've learned. Regarding doing statistics in a pandemic, there are three issues that we observed. The first issue is the implication on statistics work. And this is because of lockdowns and uncertainty, especially for statistics offices that use traditional methods or approaches in collecting data and producing statistics. Work was disrupted. Planning for the statistics work was very complicated. Statistics work, as we know, is not something that, especially field activities, something that you can switch on and switch off easily. So there are a lot of implications and costs to the work that we do, both in terms of resources, but also in terms of quality of the work. It was very challenging. Access to respondents was very difficult. Respondents were not responsive to our researchers, both physically but also on phones. Access to data was very difficult. A lot of the data that we use is secondary data, but also institutions that are supposed to give us secondary data were also not working during lockdowns. It was very dangerous for our staff in terms of serious health risks and also potentially legal issues, especially in case our staff contracted the virus. Regarding understanding the crisis, first of all, the pandemic was very fast. Lockdown instructions were also very quick, including locking down statistics activities. I remember, I think it's common across many countries, statistics activities were not considered to be essential services. And because of that, we were locked down as well, yet we were supposed to produce statistics. It was very difficult to negotiate waivers for continuing to do statistics work. But very quickly, it was realized that as countries, we needed information on the pandemic, especially to begin with public health information regarding infections, testing, tracing, capacities of our health facilities, and so on and so forth. But that was not enough. Very quickly again, we realized that especially with lockdowns and the effects of lockdowns, we realized we needed information on social issues, for example, vulnerabilities, food security, education, and many other issues. We also needed information on the economy, understanding economic performance, unemployment, supply chain disruptions, and many other things. On the political side, we had to deal with things like disapproval of some of the decisions that are being made, social and political tensions. When vaccinations came up, there were issues with prioritization. Whom do we prioritize and why? Ethical issues. Do we prioritize old people? Do we prioritize people that are vulnerable, that are sick? And what is the evidence for that? Should we prioritize economic actors, those that do businesses for the economy, and also some political considerations? And then now we are starting to look at demand for data, especially regarding recovery. Where do we expect to see recovery? How is the recovery taking shape? When are we hoping to recover from the dips of the recessions that we saw. And from our observation, many statistics offices were not able to cope and adapt to the demands of data to support in understanding the crisis and the pandemic. And with that, we learned a number of things. One of the things that we learned was that during the crisis or the pandemic, statistics work in many cases at national level, at sector levels, was affected. In some cases, it actually stopped. Yet that is when we needed statistics the most. We also realized that it is not yet natural in courts for statistics work to be considered essential and important during a crisis, and especially a pandemic like the current pandemic that we are in. We also noticed that in a crisis or in a pandemic, we don't only need the statistics that relate directly to the crisis. We normally need statistics that are wider beyond the specific crisis to be able to understand the crisis in detail and the implications of the crisis to other dimensions like social issues and economic issues. And with that information, that's when we can manage the pandemic better. And we also realize that we still need to do a lot of advocacy for statistics, especially during crisis situation. We've noticed that in many crises, if there's a financial crisis, statistics is affected the most. Now we looked at, we've been through a health pandemic, still statistics was affected the most. So we need to do a lot of advocacy so that decision makers should know and support statistics activities, especially during crises. We also realize that we need to build capabilities to adapt to challenges in data collection during crises, moving from physical field data collection activities to remote data collection, like on phones or on the web, using big data, strengthening our administrative statistics systems, and so on and so forth. So briefly speaking, this is what we learned from the pandemic. And I think we are still learning from the pandemic. But one thing is very clear, we have to strengthen our capacities to adapt to the crisis, similar crises like this one, especially in modernizing statistics operations in terms of big data and administrative data and other technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Really interesting reflections. So we've heard from all the speakers. Let me encourage those of you who are watching, who have questions that you would like to be answered, issues that you would like to raise, to do so through the facility on the live stream website. We have another 20 minutes or so remaining for questions and for discussion. I have plenty myself that have occurred to me as everyone's been talking, but we'd also really love to hear from you. So please don't be shy. I'd like to, I think this has been a really interesting session. Often in different sectors, different contexts, when the title of the session was about new solutions, we would have heard a lot about products. We would have had a lot of people saying, look, I've got this fantastic app, or I've got this amazing new platform that can solve all the problems. And what's really struck me about all of the speakers today is that we haven't heard that. What we've heard and said is about some, really interesting reflections from the different perspectives of some of the challenges of taking those solutions, which increasingly we can take for granted. There are many, many good solutions out there, but the challenges of actually putting them to work and making them part of our statistical machinery and making them serve the purposes to help solve the most important challenges. And I think what I've heard from all of you is that this is a combination of different things. We've heard quite a lot from different speakers about the importance of leadership, political commitments, of really increasing the demand for data for decision making, and the use of data in decision making. We've heard a lot about the need for institutional flexibility if partnerships are to work, and the need for different institutions to work together in new ways and overcome some of those barriers. And then we've heard also from several of you, and Yusuf just mentioned this also, about the need for individual learning and skills, and the capacity of individuals to be able to process, to analyze, to manage new types of data, new products, new ways of thinking. And I think, you know, that really brings home to me that often the data challenges are not only or even mostly technical challenges, but actually are political or institutional or individual challenges that that need to be overcome. So perhaps I might start then just by asking all of you. I think we might have lost Alex temporarily, but I think he is reconnecting. That is the challenge of these online sessions. Really interested to hear from all of you what you think is the major barrier. I think we've heard from all of you in different ways a statement of ambition around what you think is possible, but I'm interested to know what is stopping us. What are some of the major barriers for this kind of innovation, for the use of new solutions, for the modernization of statistical systems that I think we all now know is possible, but as Rika's presentation showed, is not always happening yet. So I think we're still waiting to connect with Alex. So maybe Rika, you would like to start with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Claire. And let me pick up on that specific point you just mentioned, where I did include in my presentation that when ESCAP was looking around statistical offices in Asia and the Pacific to see examples of the use of new types of data for calculating the SDG indicators, we did find examples, but the overriding number of the examples were experimental. And we started then a conversation with these statistical offices about, well, why is that? And what would it take for you to actually fully integrate these new types of data in your statistical operations? And the answer we got were very much focusing on the issues you just mentioned, Claire. They were focusing on governance arrangements, institutional arrangements, partnership arrangements. And it's such that when we then set out to organize some expert discussions in Asia and the Pacific, which are taking place this week, and the title of the discussions is Big Data, but the two main topics that we've put is actually governance and partnership models. And what we hear is that even before really realizing maybe some of the technical challenges, statistical offices are stopped because maybe their legislation prevents them from actually engaging, say, with the private sector data holder. Maybe the legislation stops them from sharing data with other government agencies. There are thousands of these types of blocks in place, and we all know that changing legislation is never a quick fix. We also hear that many statistical offices are actually not aware of, let's say, the legal landscape they operate within. Of course, they are very much aware of the statistics law, but all the other laws, which are also multiplying these years about data governance broadly within a government, and also new legislation in place for other actors in society, is a major barrier. We see national data policies being developed without statistical officers being involved in this. We heard the other day from a few private sector companies that have entered into partnership with NSOs and asked them, well, what would you wish would happen if the statistical office should be a better partner from you? And the word, I mean, different words were used, but what they were really talking about was agility. Statistical officers are just seen as rigid and totally risk averse. So just wanted to put that on the table, and then maybe our other panelists can add some thoughts here. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much. No, really interesting. And I think that whole set of issues around governance, policy, legal issues are ones that are critically important. Perhaps we don't pay enough attention to. Yusuf, I wonder if you had any more to add to Rika's list. We've heard a lot on the governance side, legal side, but from your perspective, what would you add to that list in terms of barriers that you've experienced or observed across the region for putting in practice some of these ambitions that we share?
Yeah, thank you very much, Claire. Two things. One, true statistics officers are very risk averse. And there's a good reason for that for many statistics officers. Statistics officers are supposed to produce what we call official statistics. And official statistics are supposed to be, in quotes, as accurate as possible. They are supposed to be decisive. So when a statistics office is endorsing a statistic, it should be decisive without any ambiguity, which is a very difficult task. So what statistics officers do to be able to do that, they rely on methodologies that in quotes have been vetted and robust and can be consistent across the board, which is very difficult. And in most cases, for example, for statistics officers in economic statistics, on social issues, for example, we want to work as a statistics community globally and agree on methodology, sometimes coordinated by UN agencies like FAO, like International Labour Organization, and so on and so forth, and that is very heavy. So it becomes very difficult for a statistics office to just pick a methodology off the shelf and say, this is the statistic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, absolutely well taken. And I think that's a really important point. Interested to bring Kevin in here, follow up on some of the comments that Yusuf just made about the kind of the need for rigor and the sort of tendency of falling back on, or not falling back is perhaps the wrong word, but the tendency of, you know, the sort of attraction of using established, tried and tested and rigorous methods. And Kevin, I wanted to just ask you, I guess I particularly was interested from your presentation about the issues around the uptake, the use of the SDG platform, but I just also wanted to bring in, partly in response to what Yusuf has said, really interested in your work as co-chair of the World Health Organization and UNDESA Technical Advisory Group on COVID mortality assessment, and interested in the way that the sort of the discussions that have happened within that group about obviously assessing the demands of COVID and mortality assessment brought to the fore the challenges of measuring, of getting accurate statistics on causes of death and so on, and just wondering whether that technical group has confronted any of the challenges with existing methods, and it thought about whether that group has investigated any of the new and innovative methods for trying to estimate causes of death and so on in response to the urgency of COVID. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Claire. So very much like Yusuf said, statistical offices, we have foundations for our work, and we're using the GSBPM in Ireland. But at the UN level, there's framework for statistics as well. And then in Europe, we have a framework for statistics as well, which means the statistical offices must adhere to these rules and regulations. It's in order for it to become official statistics. So that's just it. That's the life that we actually live, and we're not going to go away from that. But taking your point on the WHO, we're looking at excess deaths. So if you look at the different regions around in the UN family, we're looking at the EMRO and the Euro being very good, and the other regions being somewhat patchy. So what you're looking at is you've got really good models working. The models work really well where the data is there. Where the data is not there, you're forecasting into a fog, and you're looking for bright lights coming from different countries in the different regions, which will allow you to take your model and bring it to a reasonable estimate that you're actually there. So in terms of the WHO's work, we're splitting into 5 groups. The first group is at a very high level, trying to get the total number of excess deaths due to COVID-19. The second group then will work on the gender and looking at the age profiles coming through. The third group, which I'm also chair of, we're looking at the civil registrations. And in that, you're looking at innovative approaches to civil registration. In many of the UN regions, COVID-19 has overpowered the civil registration regions. Now, part of the SDGs, the SDG is saying that everybody needs to be recorded. Somebody must be recorded, it's there, but it's also for mortality. The mortalities need to be recorded. So in terms of that innovative approach, it's working group 3, which I am the chair of. We're looking at that, and we will have something coming to the Statistical Commission early next year, to the next Statistical Commission, in terms of recommendations around that. They will be temporary solutions, innovative solutions, in a space where there's no information coming through, be it phone, be it survey, and so forth, where people will come and say, a simple survey was it a mortality in the last 12 months? Was it COVID? Now, that is good, but it's an estimate, because the example I can take from Ireland, if we look at our health agencies, they're looking at the number of COVID mortalities. But when it comes to the CSO, we're using the civil registrations and we're coding it to ICD-10, okay? And we can see a difference in the numbers, okay? Even though the health agency said, yeah, it's a COVID. In other words, if there was a COVID at all, it's a death of COVID. But when you come through civil registrations, you can see through the international cause of death, it's not COVID is the main cause. It'd be comorbidity. It could be asthma, it could be heart, it could be lungs, something like this. So it's very important that that's understood. And this is why, certainly as part of WHO, it's important that the civil registrations come back online and are stronger going forward, because we've seen a pandemic and it can overpower systems very quickly. So there has to be forward thinking, forward planning in order to shore up or solidify these registration systems so they can meet these pandemics going forward. But as I said, it really is, this COVID-19 has affected certain areas of the UN much heavier than it is in others. Certainly in Ireland, we reacted to it, but we have experience, we have technology, we have foundations, we were able to do it. Other members of the UN were a little bit slower, others were quicker. That's just the way it actually is. But then there are still members which are overwhelmed, are still overwhelmed, and that's why the tag is there to see can we actually help in that particular space. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. No, and I think that's an incredibly important lesson for me to take from there's been a lot of attention in the world of data, and we've discussed already how important it is that we retain some of the innovations that have been developed to deal with the challenges of the pandemic and to propel us forward to new partnerships and so on. But I think for me, certainly one of the as important, if not more important lessons is absolutely that one that you just mentioned, Kevin, is to really make sure that we're building on the strongest of foundations, because those are fundamental. An effective CRVS system, a good health information management system, and so on, irrespective of any new partnerships or new data sources, will be building onto those foundations. So we are in the closing minutes now. Rika, I know you have to leave us. Thank you so much for really interesting and excellent contributions. Alex, apologies that you had some connection problems and have missed some of the discussion, but I hope you've got a flavour. So just as we finish, I wonder if I could ask really all of you in your final remarks just to reflect on, for you, what is the one thing, or you may be allowed to have more than one if you're quick. What are the things that you hope that we take out of this moment, of crisis, and use to strengthen our data and statistical systems over the longer term? And you can talk, if you want, about a specific initiative or a broader approach, but I'm interested to just look to the future. And what is your hope that we will learn and build from this moment to take forward, so that our data systems are better prepared for the next crisis? Perhaps let's go in reverse order. Yusuf, let me call on you first, then Kevin, and Alex, I will give you the last word.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Two things. One is we have to modernize statistics offices, and specifically on methodology. And again, specifically methodology for the SDGs. So using big data, we should zero in to methodology, and especially methodology for the SDGs, if we are going to deliver on the SDGs. And two is advocacy for statistics. Statistics needs a lot of advocacy and resources and capacity building, so a lot of advocacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, no, really important. And I think the advocacy, communications, politics point is absolutely central, one that sometimes doesn't come naturally to statistics systems, but is an absolutely critical part of the puzzle. Kevin, let me come back to you.
Yeah, 2 points as well. One is supporting Yusuf. Governments understand how important statistics are. Support them, support statistical offices, ensure modernization occurs, and also then the use of innovative and new approaches. The additional one to me would be Earth observations. The FAO are using that at the moment for a Mountain Green Index. So it's really important that these new technologies and approaches do become official statistics. So therefore you have both communities, the geospatial and statistical community, coming together and producing innovative and official statistics for SDGs and national purposes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Alex, we missed your contributions to some of the previous questions. So we've also talked about the key barriers to innovation, and then very keen also to hear from you on this question about the future.
Well, on the key barriers, I was following part of the conversation, but my connection was breaking down. Thank you, Claire. And on key barriers, I do think sustainable funding is still a big problem for innovation, particularly accepting risk. Sustainable funding and risk-averse institutionalization are two big problems for barriers for innovation. On key problems for the future, I do think we have to, the whole UN system, not only that, but member states, governments, etc., policymakers need to internalize strategic foresight. There's a big loophole in anticipatory frameworks within the strategy documents. So most strategy documents, they think there's a set game, and they not prepare for flexibility and scenarios and disruptions. And that happened with the SDG framework altogether. So we have a framework of 15 years ahead of strategy, but now we have a big problem, a humanitarian crisis that crashes the fundamental foundations. So I think I would say strategic foresight integration into strategy documents and strategy planning is a key element for all of us for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think between you, you've absolutely covered the basis here, the importance of good strategy, of funding to support that strategy, of the innovations, the modernization, the capacity development to implement that strategy, and then of course advocacy and political support to make sure that it's underpinned by solid political commitments, and ultimately that the products are well used to support improved decision-making, evidence, and to really make sure that policy is following the evidence and is based on the firmest of statistical foundations. Thank you so much to all of you. It's been an incredibly rich and interesting conversation. I think really got across. I hope all of our watchers and listeners will agree. Really got across some of the excitement and the possibility here, but also the challenges ahead and the many political, institutional, and individual complexities that exist in trying to actually carry out this modernization agenda. I think, famously with every crisis comes an opportunity. We have a real opportunity now in the world of data and statistics to mobilize that support, to do that advocacy that we've talked about, and to really reinforce the points that have been made here, that in a crisis, good data is an essential service. Before we had the vaccine, data was the only thing that we had to be able to understand and to control the pandemic. And I think it really has to be seen as an absolutely critical part of good policy making, of good response. And I hope that we'll be coming out of this moment of crisis with a stronger commitment to data and statistics, and with some of the tools that we need to really carry out on those, to really make good on those commitments, and have stronger systems for the next crisis, whenever that occurs, as it surely will. But thank you again so much to all of you for participating in what's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you to our wonderful secretariat and organizing team who've been on the line throughout, helping me behind the scenes and helped and really develop this session, brought us all here. Good luck with the rest of the conference. I will be seeing you again at a future session, what is tomorrow for me. I don't know whether that will be true in all parts of the world. And wish you all a very, very good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
This concludes session 5, part B. Let me thank Ms. Melamid and the panelists for this extensive experience sharing. This brings us to the end of day 2 of the International Conference on Official Statistics. I'd like to thank all the session chairs, panelists, and participants for joining us. The conference will resume tomorrow at the same time as today, that is 8:30 a.m. in Seoul, 1:30 a.m. in Geneva, and 7:30 p.m. on September 1st, New York. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you all.